Well, good evening, friends and family of the Bipartisan Policy Center, and welcome to one of our most important nights of the year. Tonight we are awarding our fourth annual Patriot and Legislative Action Awards, honoring 6 members of Congress who embrace the premise that it takes hard work to govern a divided country. We are acknowledging tonight 6 productive partisans, people with the courage and creativity to both dignify differences and forge the kind of coalitions that are necessary to achieve real and durable change. It is probably no surprise that the people who we are acknowledging tonight reflect the spirit and the basic premise of the Bipartisan Policy Center. Nearly 15 years ago, when Senators Howard Baker, Tom Daschle, Bob Dole, and George Mitchell came together to join me in helping to create this organization, we had 4 basic ideas that still, I think, hold true to our mission today. They are that no single party or ideology has a complete monopoly on all good thought. We recognize that evidence and expertise still matter. And I want to thank the BPC staff of BPC Action, and the hundreds of folks, many of you on this video chat this evening, who have devoted your time and passion and credibility to the work of our organization. Third, we strongly believe that in a divided country, durable policy requires engagement across the aisle. I think we have long understood that all or nothing politics get you a predictable answer, and it is almost never all. And finally, we came together around the premise that effective democracy requires a combination of thinking and doing. The Bipartisan Policy Center has always aspired to combine the best elements of a think tank with the kind of aggressive intent of a trade association. And it is the combination of the Bipartisan Policy Center and our partner organization, BPC Action, that has really animated the work of this organization. I should also just note, when reflecting upon our founders, that we just enjoyed the opportunity a few moments ago to wish Senator Bob Dole a happy 97th birthday. Senator Dole turns 97 tomorrow. And we love him very much. He is really, I think, one of the people who will always represent the highest ambition of productive partisanship. And he is with us on the call today, and we are just delighted that he could take the time to be with us. As we think about the purpose of today's event, I want to just say a moment about the work that we have had opportunities to do with many of these members. Whether BPC is working on energy and health policy, or immigration, or retirement security, or childcare, debt and deficit control, we always recognize that there are some members of Congress who are kind of the go-to folks, the people who you want to sit down with to explore a different kind of idea. And it's in our experience that working with those members of Congress throughout the course of our projects is the only way that we actually achieve meaningful progress. We have learned over the years that the forces of rigidity and division are well-resourced and well-defined, but that if you are a member of Congress who is trying to explore a new idea or question a well-worn assumption, that can be a very lonely exercise. So the BPC exists to try to provide support for members like those we are honoring tonight, the people who are fundamentally committed to the interests of the nation and willing to do the tough work to move the country forward. We also focus a great deal at BPC on the importance of relationships, and recognize that Congress, as a deliberate organization, is founded upon just basic human capacity for trust and humor and collaboration. And so a lot of the work that we do, and some of the work we'll be talking about tonight, is seeking just to support that basic interaction through our American Congressional Exchange, where we enable members in the House from both parties to spend weekends. We also enjoy spending time with freshmen in sophomore class, and we have pulled together folks for retreats over the course of the last couple of years, which have been very productive. Finally, as I start to turn to our program, it is important for us always to recognize that at its core, the Bipartisan Policy Center is about its people. I have been able to scan the left margin here, and just really delighted just to note that we are joined by some of just our most important friends and leaders. We have with us Senator Bill Frist. I see Secretary Dan Glickman, Governors Haley Barbour and Jim Blanchard. I'm sure I'm going to miss some folks. I see from members of Congress, Debbie Dingell, John Tanner, Connie Morella, also Ambassador Negroponte, Ambassador Cutler. And I, of course, want to acknowledge the boards of the Bipartisan Policy Center and Chair Robbie Bach and the board of the Bipartisan Policy Center Action and their chair, Kim Dorgan. So I will simply acknowledge again how important it is that we're joined by so many friends and family tonight. I think it is in the spirit of Senator Dole, who turned 97 tomorrow, that BPC was founded 15 years ago. And I think I will turn us to the program with just a couple of further introductory comments. We are coming forth with two different awards tonight. The Patriot Award, which is essentially kind of the Bipartisan Policy Center's version of a Lifetime Achievement Award, which recognizes extraordinary resilience and leadership over a course of a long career. The very first Patriot Award, I am proud to say, was awarded to Representatives John Lewis and Sam Johnson back in 2016, and it was a proud moment for the organization. I know we all are really deeply saddened by the loss of Congressman Lewis. We also will be providing 4 Legislative Action Awards, which are designed to recognize members of Congress who are in the beginnings of their career, who having served 6 years or less and are breathing new life and purpose into the legislative process. So today's agenda, over the course of the next 50 minutes, we are delighted that we have all 4 recipients of our Legislative Action Awards joining us live. If they are breathing heavily, it is because many of them just cast votes on the NDAA and have raced over to their computer screens. In addition, we are going to probably have about 10 different speakers. We have ambitions for a multimedia presentation. We will be presenting awards. We are going to have lightning round, panel discussions, audience questions. I am looking at 3 different screens at a ping pong table in my basement. So what could go wrong, as apparently my 90 seconds of silence have already evidenced. It's going to be a little messy, like our democracy itself. And I appreciate everybody's indulgence and patience. We obviously had been looking forward to being together with all of you in person back on March 11th, when we had intended to do this award ceremony with a little more grace and 3-dimensionality. But we are all finding ourselves making the best of what we know is a very challenging moment for the country. So I would like to begin by inviting BPC board member, former senator from Maine, and national icon Olympia Snow, to recognize our Patriot Award winners, Senator Lamar Alexander and Senator Murray. They were unfortunately not able to reschedule and join us tonight, but they do have some short videos they will share after some comments from Olympia. I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jason. And I want to thank all of you for joining us virtually on this very special occasion at the BPC. And for all of us who have had the opportunity to know and to work with tonight's 2020 Patriot Award winners, Senator Lamar Alexander and Senator Patty Murray. I certainly had the pleasure and privilege to work with both of them in the United States Senate. And throughout my tenure, I witnessed firsthand how they have, in the authentic spirit of the Patriot Award, personify the highest values and purpose of public service. When Lamar first ran for the Senate, he pledged that he would serve his state with conservative principles and an independent attitude. And that is precisely what he has done. In that vein, as chair of the Senate Help Committee, he chose to seek common ground on multiple issues of vital national importance with the committee's ranking member, Senator Patty Murray, who has shared in the tenet of placing country ahead of politics. Over her decades in the Senate, her concerted efforts to weave principles with pragmatism underscores her recognition that compromise is indispensable in governing in a democracy, and all the more so with a deeply divided nation. Together, Senator Alexander and Senator Murray constitute a rare bipartisan team. Either of them could have made very different choices, yet they intentionally undertook processes of exploration and negotiation that are laborious, time-intensive, and potentially politically risky, but represent the principle that, as someone once said, bipartisanship isn't just a political theory, it is a political necessity. In tandem, they moved heaven and earth in 2015 to overhaul the No Child Left Behind law that had languished unauthorized for 8 consecutive years and became the most significant rewrite of education law in well over a decade. They also advanced and enacted the consequential 21st Century Cures Act, breakthrough legislation to accelerate delivery of potentially life and death medical innovations to patients. And now Senators Alexander and Murray have been working together once again on critical legislation to improve pricing transparency and end the horrific practice of surprise medical billing. Tonight, we have the honor to celebrate these leaders who have managed to transcend the historic polarization in the United States Congress. In an atmosphere that is rife with diversion and division, it is crucial that we commemorate the ideals that are embodied by Senator Lamar Alexander and Senator Patty Murray, because they cannot be lost for the future, just as they must not be lost on those who serve today. So now let's hear from the senior senator from Tennessee, Lamar Alexander.
Hello, I'm Lamar Alexander, and thank you for this award. But I really ought to be thanking each of you for what you do to promote bipartisanship and to help Congress get things done here in Washington. For me, bipartisanship is a tactic, not the goal. And my goal as a United States Senator is a result. It's hard to get here. It's hard to stay here. And while you're here, you might as well try to accomplish something good for the country. You need 60 votes to reach a result on a major issue in the United States Senate. And I learned to count in the Maryville Public Schools, and since there are only 53 of us Republican senators, that means working with Democrats. I found that formula has worked pretty well to reduce the park maintenance backlog, to reform copyright laws to make sure songwriters are paid a fair value for their work, to fix No Child Left Behind, to enact 21st century cures, to save students hundreds of billions of dollars by tying student loan interest rates to market rates, and appropriating record funding for several straight years for biomedical research, our national labs, and supercomputing. Forcing a consensus by requiring 60 votes on major issues, that means allowing a filibuster, is why we have a United States Senate. Our polarized country needs an institution that can work out difficult problems in a way that the rest of the country can accept. I've been privileged to work on most of these issues with Senators Patty Murray and Dianne Feinstein, Democrats, but they also understand how to get a result in the Senate, and they're willing to work together to do that. So thank you again for the recognition, and thank you for all that you do.
And now we'll hear from the senior senator from Washington, Patty Murray.
Thank you to the Bipartisan Policy Center for presenting me with the 2020 Patriot Award and for all your work promoting bipartisan cooperation across government. BPC has been a great partner to me on important issues like evidence-based policymaking and higher education, so this really is an honor. I also want to congratulate my colleagues who are also receiving awards and thank them for their continued work across the aisle in Congress. In these polarizing times, finding compromise on issues that so often divide us can be difficult, but especially as our country faces the challenges of COVID-19, police brutality and systemic racism, and a major economic crisis, we need everyone committed to putting our constituents first and finding meaningful solutions. Because serving in Congress isn't about hiding in partisan corners. It's about looking for ways to make progress for the people of your state and country. I've always said that I'd work with anyone, regardless of party, when there's a way to truly help people and solve problems. And that's what I intend to keep doing. Thank you again for this wonderful award and for all you do.
Well, thank you both, Senator Snow and Senators Alexander and Murray. We have really had a great experience working with the Senate Help Committee on so many issues, from surprise medical billing to higher ed reform to evidence-based policymaking. And we look forward to looking to their leadership in these months ahead. It is now my pleasure to introduce BPC board member Michael Steele. Everyone, I believe, knows Michael's the former Lieutenant Governor of Maryland. He was the chair of the RNC. And if you spend any time watching a square black box with a 48-inch screen, you spend a lot of time hanging out with Michael Steele, because he has been one of the most forthright, creative, and I think insightfully entertaining pundits the country has enjoyed in the last several years. So we always greatly appreciate Michael joining us, and Michael will be presenting the Legislative Action Awards to our Senate awardees, and then I will come back and have a chance for a short conversation.
Thank you very much, Jason. It is a real pleasure to be with everyone this evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm so pleased to present the 2020 Legislative Action Award to our two Senate recipients this year, Senator Bill Cassidy, a Republican from Louisiana, and Senator Tina Smith, a Democrat from Minnesota. Since 2014, Dr. Bill Cassidy has represented the state of Louisiana in the United States Senate following his tenure in the U.S. House. In both private medicine and public service, Senator Cassidy has demonstrated a profound concern for improving the lives of Americans, and here in Washington, he has translated this concern into meaningful legislative accomplishments, working often with his colleagues across the aisle, and indeed, making a difference. Among the sophomore class of senators, he attracted the most co-sponsors on his bills, wrote the most laws, and got bipartisan co-sponsors on his own bills more than 76% of the time. In fact, one of the 11 bills in which he was the primary co-sponsor that was enacted into law had only Democratic co-sponsors. The Comb Act, which expanded Medicare coverage for certain services provided by opioid treatment programs. His ability to expand Medicare under a Republican Senate majority was a truly towering achievement. BPC is also grateful for Senator Cassidy's bipartisan work with Senator Maggie Hassan to find solutions to the growing problem of surprise medical billing. And he's working with BPC's paid family leave team to find ways to help working families who need time off to care for their loved ones. Now, Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota won a special election to the Senate in 2018 following her service in a role I know a little bit about as lieutenant governor of her great state. And in the Senate, she too has demonstrated a willingness to work with colleagues on the other side to improve the lives of all Americans. That's especially true when it comes to raising awareness of the healthcare needs for rural Americans. Senator Smith joined with Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska to sponsor a bill modernizing maternal and obstetric medical care in rural communities. She also introduced a bill with Republican Senator John Barrasso from Wyoming to strengthen rural health clinics, and with Senator Smith is also a member of BPC's honorary congressional task force on rural health, where she has contributed greatly to this critical conversation. Beyond health, she is also committed to drafting legislation to help rural communities thrive economically. To that end, Senator Smith founded the newly formed bipartisan Senate Rural Working Group with Senators Baldwin, Fisher, and Rounds. And in one more example of her willingness to reach out, she has teamed with Republican Senator Susan Collins of Maine on a promising bill to renew and expand the Energy Department's Office of Wind Energy. So with that, let me say congratulations to both of you. And if you would like to hold up your awards, we will be very happy to offer our virtual applause and congratulations to each one of you. So I'll kick this back to you, Jason, for a great conversation with our honorees.
Yeah. There you are.
I now have the pleasure of a 13-minute intense panel about the future of American democracy. But let me just begin by just telling you how much we appreciate your service, and just see if you want to make any kind of opening comments. Senator Cassidy, may ask you to go first.
Yeah, first, I told my staff, can you hear me, by the way?
Very well.
I told my staff, make sure I don't forget it. So I got to fire somebody. I forgot it.
Well,
that said, I like the way Senator Snow introduced Lamar Alexander. When he ran for office, he said, I'm going to run as a conservative who will be independent. And I think the kind of fallacy of bipartisanship is that you have to give up your conservative or your liberal values in order to achieve that which is best for the country. I think I vote with the president 95% of the time. And when we occasionally part, he actually wishes he didn't have to sign the bill that I voted against. But when Lamar says it is a tactic, it is a tactic. I'm more likely to pass something if I work with Senator Smith or with Senator Hassan. And they are more likely to pass if they vote with me. So Tina can have her position philosophically and I mine. We'll both get our proverbial 80% of that which we want. And the 20% that we come together on is usually something that we can agree to disagree on, but it doesn't affect the essence of who we are politically. And I think we have to dispel that myth. For some reason, some folks think that if you work together, there's something wrong. I say if you work together, there's something right, because you're actually going to pass legislation that reflects the values that we were both sent to represent. I thank you for the award. I'm honored. I thank most of all my colleagues on both sides of the aisle that have worked with us. By the way, I inherited, just as examples, I inherited a bill from Orrin Hatch in which he and Elizabeth Warren are the co-sponsors. He asked me to take it over. We have 34 sponsors. And just before I spoke to Tina tonight, I spoke to her about getting this bill through. And the one we have with Maggie Hassan on surprise medical billing, 34 co-sponsors, 17 and 17, I think is thereabouts. So you can actually get things done if you've just made the decision, I'll be true to myself, but I'll also be true to getting something passed. So thank you for the award, and thanks for Tina for all the collaboration she and I have had.
Senator, it's not surprising,
Absolutely.
but nice to know that you're not resting on your laurels since you received this award. It's good to see you're still hard at work for the American people. And I think your articulation of what political courage means very much lines up with what we think is good for effective democracy. So thank you. Senator Smith, I have a couple of questions, but before I get started, really just love to hear what's on your mind. Thank you for joining us.
Sure. Well, it's great to be with you. I'm really tickled to get this recognition from the Bipartisan Policy Center and to do it with Bill Cassidy, with whom I've done a lot of collaborating. I'm also really tickled to say that I'm 62 years old and I'm getting recognized as a rising star. So I think that is, you got to love that. What I want to say about this is, I think that most people in Minnesota, like most people around this country, they don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm a Democrat, I need to get my kids to school, or I'm a Republican and I need to figure out how to pay my mortgage. Most people wake up in the morning and they spend their days just trying to figure out how to make their lives work. And too often here in Washington, we approach folks with our partisan kind of glasses on, and we don't meet them where they are in their lives. And when I first got to the Senate, I said that I was willing to work with anyone, even people that I disagreed with, if we could find common ground in ways that would move Minnesota forward and move our country forward. And if you do that, and you're willing to really listen hard, not just think about how you're going to win an argument, but think about how you're going to get something done, you can accomplish things even in this really partisan time. And to me, that is the reward of this really, really hard job, because it is hard to do bipartisan work. It is easier to sort of stay in your corners and talk about how bad the other guys are. But at the end of the day, that's just talk, that's not action. So thank you so much. It's great to be with you. I'm excited to have a conversation with everyone and just really appreciate it.
Well, that's a great start. I often lament that people think that our work is a gentle game, this bipartisanship, as opposed to just the kind of a constructive collision that in a diverse society is necessary to move anything forward. So I really appreciate that sentiment. So the last few months have been pretty tragic and pretty tough for the country. And Congress has demonstrated some remarkable competence in crisis. I think that, people always lament that Congress can only act in crisis. Thank God Congress can act in crisis. I wonder how it's going. And I ask if you both could talk a little bit about just what enabled the Congress to come together and pass these very significant pieces of legislation. And what can you kind of prognosticate about the next couple weeks, which seem like they're going to be pretty tough. I guess my question is that sense of capability going to be as resilient as the virus that we are up against?
Well,
Tina?
I mean, I always, in this most divisive period, I remind people that the work that we've done together to address the economic and public health earthquake that has been COVID-19 has been resoundingly bipartisan. I mean, it has been sometimes partisan before it was bipartisan. Sometimes you have to kind of work things out, but that's the way it happens. I also think that in this moment, there's something happening in this country that gives me a great sense of hope and optimism, even in the midst of all of the tragedy. And that is the capacity of this country, I believe, to really reckon with the issues of racial justice and to be compelled to look at the inequity in our society, and the opportunity to finally really address it and deal with it is, I think, really a moment of inspiration for me. And, you know, in this country, we've always made the biggest progress when we face the biggest crisis. And that is the way I think that we are in a crisis right now.
We anticipate the Senate leader coming forward with the kind of outlines of the next COVID package here, and some lines are being drawn pretty deep. What do you think is going to, and I fundamentally believe Congress is going to act. I don't think you're going to go home for August recess. Might be a day or two later than imagined, but hard to imagine that you will not, in fact, move another piece of legislation forward. Talk a little bit about what you think is going to be necessary to get the job done.
Well, first I'll address the previous point. Americans care about Americans. In my medical practice, I used to take care of inmates. I would go out to a maximum security prison once a month. Right after 9/11, I went out there, and here is the largest maximum security prison in the nation. My patients were there, and typically you get people off of drugs, they're pretty nice people. And they were murderers, rapists, drug dealers, you name it. They were so upset about America being attacked at 9/11. And they just were so connected with New Yorkers who have been attacked because they felt that we as Americans have been attacked. I thought about it. A group of folks doing life for antisocial activity were connected to society in a common defense of we as Americans. Now, I've always been kind of inspired by that, if you will. So similarly, that first package came together because we as Americans felt totally assaulted by a virus no one can see, but nonetheless, regardless of your background, regardless of your political persuasion, you were at risk of dying. Fortunately, it is not quite the same emergency right now. We're on the way to a vaccine, maybe as soon as fall. There's been a safety net that has been built beneath family incomes and beneath employers to keep people employed that has worked remarkably well. There is more to do, to be sure. But the issue will probably be, do we remain focused upon a coronavirus response, or do we attempt to go among some other issues, very compelling, extremely compelling, but nonetheless perhaps tangential to coronavirus? Now, that's where we come back to what you said earlier, Jason. I do think there'll be a bill passed, but there's always brinksmanship. We always know what the other party really wants. I have to admit, in this case, I think both parties want the same thing, but they have to almost stake out that which they presume to not like in order to have some sort of positioning. But I do think we'll pass something. It'll be a little less bipartisan in process going up to it, but I think ultimately it'll continue this building a safety net between families, addressing the medical crisis, and trying to keep our economy in shape so that we go forward creating opportunity for all Americans. And by the way, it will be bipartisan in the final vote. So I'd like to say that it's actually the best of what we're celebrating tonight.
Well, that is encouraging. I will note that, as I think most people are aware, the Democratic House HEROES Act is about a $3 trillion price tag, and the administration had said that they wanted to try to limit things to about $1 trillion. So on behalf of the Bipartisan Policy Center, I am courageously predicting a roughly $2 trillion package, and I will do that live on air for all to see. Let me ask you both just kind of a final question, and that is just to think forward a little bit. We're going to be careening into a very partisan election season, and regardless of who has the gavel in the Senate, it is going to be a closely divided body. Share with me some optimism about what you think the U.S. Senate can do together to help us kind of climb out of this recession early next year. Senator Smith, what would you hope your colleagues focus on as kind of an engine of our recovery?
No. Well, I'm going to just talk about one issue that is really near and dear to my heart, which is the need for childcare in this country. The childcare system in our country is so fragmented and so fragile right now. We're looking at nearly half of all childcare centers potentially going out of business because of the pressures around COVID. So I believe that this is a bipartisan issue. You can see it in some of the proposals that have come forward. I'm working on a proposal with Elizabeth Warren. Senator Ernst has a proposal. I think that this is going to be something that we really are going to need to put our shoulder into. It is an economic issue as well as a moral issue and an education issue, and something that we're going to have to really focus on. And I think we could do great things.
Well, that is an idea and an issue we share. Senator?
You mentioned the recovery. Really, the recovery, I think, may take care of itself. I say that because you saw like a $33 million job loss, but then you saw like a $22 million gain, a million job gain. It really was a sharp V. If we can take care of the public health aspect of this, then I think the recovery will do relatively well. That said, we still have structural issues in our society. I would love it if we could have an infrastructure package, because I do think those most vulnerable to economic fallout are those who work kind of the bottom two quintiles of society. They don't make a living on Zoom calls. They make a living with their hands. If we could have an infrastructure package in which we would put people at construction to work with pull through for manufacturing, stimulation of service industry, and stimulation of the oil and gas, you need gasoline to power tractors, you would put a lot of people to work who right now are bearing the brunt of this economic shutdown. Ideally, we could put that together. There's no guarantee. On the other hand, Americans usually muddle through and get what's right, and occasionally have a point of clarity where they really leap forward. Hopefully this post-pandemic will be one of those moments of clarity where we can really leap forward, taking care of that issue for employment, but also the structural inefficiencies of an inadequate infrastructure. So that's my hope.
All right. Well, I think if we can invest in our kids and our roads and our bridges, we will be moving the country forward. So I appreciate very much both of your service, your work, your joining us tonight, and thank you for being our Legislative Action Awardees.
Appreciate it.
It is now my pleasure to introduce actually the Bipartisan Policy Center's newest board member, Julian Castro. I think many of you know Secretary Castro served in the Obama administration as the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. He was the mayor of San Antonio. He was a compelling presence on the Democratic presidential debate stage, and he is with us to introduce the two House members who have been awarded with the Legislative Achievement Award. Secretary.
All right. Hello, Jason. Hello, everybody out there from Texas. I am not intentionally trying to get the worst room rater ranking ever, being next to this printer, but I thought that it might be fitting for us actually today, because we all hope that in short order there's going to be some good new legislation being printed out. I want to, commend you, Jason, and the entire BPC staff. It's great to be a new board member. I'm looking forward to the work. To everybody on the call, thank you for your efforts with the organization. And to all of our awardees on the Senate side, congratulations for their well-earned recognition. The work of the BPC and of the folks that we're recognizing tonight is so needed right now. As others have said, during this time of national emergency, we need Congress to come together and to find solutions. And we're going to recognize some folks on the House side who are doing just that. In that vein, it's a privilege to introduce our two legislative action awardees from the House of Representatives, Congressman Garret Graves, who's a Republican from Louisiana, and Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy, a Democrat from Florida. Representative Graves was first elected to Congress in 2014. He scores high on both bipartisan and legislative effectiveness scales and received bipartisan co-sponsors on his legislation more often than 3/4 of his Republican colleagues. Showcasing his ability to move legislation, Representative Graves was the primary sponsor of a number of bills that have been enacted into law, attracting Democratic co-sponsors for each one of them. Indeed, his development and passage of a range of measures to streamline FEMA operations and responses garnered a Democrat as the one and only original co-sponsor. And importantly, from his position as ranking member of the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, BPC has been proud to work with Congressman Graves and his staff on a multitude of issues to mitigate the effects of climate change. And his efforts to work seriously and thoughtfully on this issue has, quite frankly, created critically needed space for the beginning of bipartisan congressional action on it. Congresswoman Murphy was first elected to represent her Central Florida district in 2016 as the first Vietnamese American woman to ever be elected to Congress. And she quickly set herself apart as a lawmaker focused first and foremost on policy over politics. We were inspired by Representative Murphy's issue-centered approach to the legislative process that serves both her district and the House of Representatives so very well. She ranks higher than 82% of her House colleagues on the Lugar Center Bipartisan Index and ranks 26th among fellow House Democrats in the Center for Effective Lawmaking's Legislative Effectiveness Index, even as she is just in her second term. Among first-term legislators, she was the 11th most likely to get bipartisan co-sponsors on legislation she introduced and was second in the number of laws introduced that were actually enacted. Compared to all representatives, she is in the 98th percentile in the number of bipartisan bills that she co-sponsored. And as but one example of her effectiveness, she introduced legislation that was ultimately enacted to bolster economic opportunity by increasing access to small dollar loans and technical assistance for startups and for smaller business firms. And finally, we're very pleased by both representatives' willingness to bridge political divides with their participation in BPC's American Congressional Exchange Program, or ACE, that I know many here are familiar with, where members from opposite parties travel to one another's districts to learn more about what motivates each other and to help build bipartisan trust. These are the kind of legislators that America sorely needs today, people who are willing to work together to find common ground and to find. And so we couldn't be more pleased to present Garret Graves and Stephanie Murphy with our 2020 Legislative Action Award. I hope that Congressman Graves and Congresswoman Murphy, if y'all could possibly hold up your awards for a second so that we can recognize you. And as we turn this back over to Jason, thank you. Let's give them a round of applause up there. Congratulations.
So it's a real pleasure to be with the two of you. As Secretary Castro said, you are two of the most favorite alumna of our ACE program. Congressman Murphy, you actually led our very first ACE trip ever with Jack Bergman. And Garret, I will note that you were the only ACE participant ever to get your colleague to sleep on a houseboat in the swamp. And so that was also something that was a notorious achievement. The ethics office is still calling me about that exactly. But let me start there and just talk a little bit about relationships in Congress. I think that, my experience is that members of Congress are almost always very good people struggling with very challenging incentives. And one of the things that I think most people don't realize is just how hard it is to find time to get to know your colleagues, even within your own party, but certainly across the aisle. And Congressman Murphy, just talk a little bit about your experience with Jack Bergman and how that program has affected. I mean, I think it's true to the spirit of who you are as a member of Congress. It's not like we created bipartisanship for Stephanie Murphy, but give the people on the teleprompter here a little bit of a sense of what the opportunities are to build those relationships.
Well, first, Jason, let me just say it's so great to be here with you and with my good friend, Garret Graves, and a real honor to receive this award. I am really honored and certainly appreciate it. And, I had such a great time on the exchange in January of, I believe it was 2018. Jack came to my district. Jack Bergman is somebody who represents a district in Michigan where it's much larger than my district. He says that, sometimes the biggest export of his district are the young people. They have a very different economy, obviously weather. I think he got a good deal coming to Florida in January. And my district is a district in Central Florida, right out part of Orlando. And we're a district that's evenly split between Democrats, Republicans, and independents. So just a very different kind of district than Jack's. And so I had the pleasure of hosting him in my district, and we got out and went to a farmer's market. We met with veterans in my community. We, just kind of got a chance to show him all of the great things that I love about my district. And he stayed an extra day and we played a little golf. So that was fantastic too. But out of that trip, we came up with a bill and actually got it passed into law. We, when we spoke with our veterans, they told us that they didn't feel that the transition from being in uniformed service to being a veteran prepared them adequately. And so Jack and I got this feedback together at this Veteran Advisory Board, and we set to work crafting a bill to address this, and made some changes to the Transition Assistance Program, and worked. And within about a year of that trip and the initiation of that bill became law. So these exchanges are incredibly important on a personal level of being able to develop relationships and have interactions outside of Congress, but also to see one another's districts. And then we were able to get tangible bipartisan policy into law that's going to help the lives of veterans across this country. So it was a great experience. I'll also note that I went to Michigan in I believe February. So I definitely got the short end of the weather deal, but it was phenomenal. A really great opportunity to see his district and do a few fun things like lead dogs into a dog sled race, and we went snowmobiling, which I'd never done before. So it was a fantastic opportunity, and certainly appreciate the Bipartisan Policy Center sponsoring that.
Well, I will tell you that it was an experiment, that first trip, and you two were just so amazing together that it inspired now about 20 since. So Congressman Graves, you had Alan Lowenthal visit you, and when we thought okay, Graves and Lowenthal, I don't know if folks know Congressman Lowenthal, but pretty progressive Democrat from Southern California. We were trying to figure out what do these two guys have in common, and we're like, coastlines. They have coastlines in common, and I think actually that was the animating idea of a lot of the trip, was thinking about coastal resiliency and the different and kind of common interests between Southern California and Louisiana coast. But reflect a little bit on that experience for us.
Yeah. Let's be clear. Alan is a absolutely crazy flaming liberal, but I love that man. I do. He's a great guy. Jason, if I can just very quickly, I do want to congratulate Stephanie and Senator Smith and Cassidy on their recognition. I have been unsuccessful getting Congresswoman Murphy to co-sponsor any of our bills. However, I was successful in getting her to enter into a bet that she could never win, which resulted in her wearing an inflatable LSU Tiger on the Capitol grounds, which was priceless. But let me go back to your question. In Louisiana, and I hope it's not lost on anyone that here you had a senator from Louisiana and a House member from Louisiana that just were recognized. At home, if you ask folks to pick among a Democrat Party, Republican Party, or a Mardi Gras party, they're going to choose Mardi Gras party every time. And the deal is that at home we like to have fun. We really do, and it bridges the ideological spectrum. It just kind of brings everyone together. We have open primary systems that I think that to some degree dilutes the role of partisanship and the power of the political parties, because when we're running for office in a primary, it doesn't matter if you're a flaming left wing or if you're hardcore right wing, everyone can vote. And so you're not out there trying to isolate or ostracize different voters and just trying to attract a portion of the ideological spectrum. And I think that it results in folks wanting to work together and wanting to get things done in a bipartisan manner. The reality is, as you all know, in the House of Representatives, if you're the majority party, you do not need a single person in the minority to their vote to work with them, their co-sponsorship or anything. But I think that forcing yourself into those discussions results in you seeing different perspectives. It results in you often improving your legislation. And I think that at the end of the day, it results in you being more successful in terms of legislative strategies. And so I think that in many cases, the parties prevent us from being able to have dialogue with folks on the other side of the aisle. But I think it's absolutely critical that we do, because now that I have become so close with my crazy friend Alan Lowenthal, it's hard to hate up close, and he and I are close.
So let me pick up on that. I've got some questions trickling in from the crowd here. One is from Frank Islam, and you talked about open primaries, but Frank's asked the question, based on your experiences as members, what might be one doable thing that should be changed that would make it easier for members to work across the aisle to strengthen collaboration? So kind of a process question, but we care about the institution. There have been some very strong efforts. I think Congressman Kilmer, who's been leading that select committee on modernization, has been thinking a lot about just Congress as just a legislation machine. Can you make any suggestions about what you might see as kind of practical efforts that would just increase your capacity to kind of deliberate, resolve problems, get stuff done? Definitely.
Sure. Well, I'll point out one of the things that, and Garret, I figured that you would have to raise that humiliating experience on this. And I will say that he's not to be trusted, because that wasn't exactly the deal. But yes, inflatable tiger it was.
I missed this moment. Do we have bring that up, Greg? All right, well, we'll get you next time.
Well, anyways, but I'll point out one of the things that we did this Congress that I think really helped to create an environment where bipartisanship is rewarded, and then maybe throw out another idea. So at the beginning of this Congress, there were a group of us that were involved in what we called the Speakers Project, which was a commitment to hold our vote, a commitment that we made before we knew who would be in control of the House, but a commitment to hold our vote until whoever was elected speaker had made commitments to change the House rules. And as a part of that effort, we were able to change the House rules so that there would be what was called a consensus calendar. If you could secure bipartisan support for a piece of legislation and 290 co-sponsors, it would have a pathway to the floor, either through committee or to the floor for a vote. And that gave an opportunity for people who worked hard to secure broad bipartisan support to be able to move legislation forward. And I believe for amendments, it was 20 Rs and 20 Ds. And those small changes really gave a pathway for bipartisan legislation to move forward, and gave the incentive to find and to write legislation that could secure that kind of broad bipartisan support. So I think things like that, those kind of, they're a little bit arcane rules changes, can make a huge difference. The other thing kind of looking forward, I think a big thing that could make bipartisanship more healthy in our Congress is to have redistricting so that districts are a bit more balanced. I represent a district that is evenly split between D's, R's, and no party affiliates. And so it forces me to see different perspectives and represent all the people in my district. And I can't be a party line Democrat voter, when I vote on the House floor, because that wouldn't represent my district. And I think if we had districts that were more evenly drawn, you would have less of this hyper-partisanship that comes from having the 80% or more of districts in a situation where you can't lose them as a D or can't lose them as an R. A district evenly split like mine, there's only 8 of them in the country. So I think a fairer redistricting would move us a long way forward in having the kinds of members that would be interested in engaging in bipartisanship.
Great input. So, Garret, I'm going to paraphrase a question from Eleanor Clift, and she might have wanted to ask it to some of your Senate colleagues, but I think you're up to the task. And the question is, if Joe Biden wins the presidency and Senator McConnell is minority leader, what are the chances that Republicans will work with the administration? And conversely, how likely is it that Democrats will just try to blow through the filibuster and do a one-party mandate rule on the left? So, what's your prognostication about what the country might look like with that form of divided government?
Yeah, sure. Well, look, first, I think it's most important to actually pull this up here. So that's, I think the more we can do things like this with our colleagues, that's Stephanie wearing an inflatable tiger, the more the American democracy will succeed.
I'm going to have to find a way to pay you back for that. Thanks, Garret.
Your technological prowess is impressive.
No, hey, so seriously, I think that the what has happened, in my opinion, you start looking at the 24-hour news cycle, you look at how the media effectively rewards behavior. It rewards the antagonistic, provocative behavior at this point in time. And the reality is, what needs to be rewarded is actually making progress. And I think that I would absolutely be willing to work with a Biden administration. I think there are a lot of folks in the Senate that would as well, provided that they're willing to be reasonable, they're willing to be even-handed, they're willing to discuss policy. It just, my personal opinion, the political parties on both sides have become so powerful and end up influencing and using their majority in a way to promote themselves and adversely affect the other side. And of course, that perverts or distorts what is in the best interest of the American public. And I will, as I have with many folks, and I know that there are a lot of, again, Republicans and Democrats, that would be willing to have sound policy discussions, provided that we focus on what is in the best interest of Americans. I will do it all day long, but politics ends up seeping into everything, and it distorts reality. And I can't say it enough. It is not in the best interest of Americans.
So I think we have time for a final question. And picking from the list, I'm going to pick, there are a couple on climate change. I think Secretary Castro noted that this is something that you have both worked on a great deal, energy and climate. Garret, you have led the Republican voice on the select committee, and Stephanie, as a leader of the Blue Dogs, you've been focusing on the importance of a transition that acknowledges, traditional energy production and development. And so I had noted that, of many issues we work on, the one that had been getting more bipartisan by the day has been climate change, which might be soaring over a low bar, but nevertheless, the last several months of discussion have been very much focused on practical solutions, right? Something that is not going to only focus on energy efficiency and renewables and try to ban energy production, and at the same time recognize that, this is a real issue that requires dedicated solutions. So let me just ask the two of you in your kind of closing reflections, how do you imagine climate change being on the agenda as the nation now focuses so much attention on the public health crisis and economic recovery? Do you believe climate change will be a significant conversation going forwards, and how do you see the parties coming together? And I'll go to you first, Congressman Graves.
All right. Yeah, thanks. So, Jason, first, I'll just say that a lot of Republicans have run from this topic, and it has been one of those polarizing issues where as soon as you bring it up, each party runs to their respective corners and either denies it's happening or says it's the greatest crisis ever. And the reality is that both of them are wrong. Here's the thing. First, I think if you start taking it apart in pieces, something that affects the people that Stephanie represents and the people that I represent is resiliency. We're seeing our communities being impacted more frequently by these rain bombs, by hurricanes, by 500 and 1,000-year floods happening more frequently. The math doesn't make sense anymore with those metrics. And so that's something that we can and should be working on and quite frankly have made a lot of progress on in the last probably 3 years. Secondly, emissions. Emissions is one of those things that a lot of people just immediately run from, particularly in the Republican side. But here's a fact that really is powerful and should help to sort of allay those fears. The United States has reduced emissions more than the next 12 emissions reducing countries combined. And to a large degree, it's been done without all of these mandates and requirements on folks. And so let's take a look at some of those because we've been able to have a growing economy and reduce emissions. Let's look at the strategies that have resulted in that and let's double down on them. Let's triple down on them and just continue building on growing the economy and on reducing emissions. Last thing, Jason, I do think it's important to make note of this. We're in a little bit different baseline today. Coronavirus has probably resulted in the greatest, if not one of the greatest reductions in global emissions ever. And so we do need to look at that. We need to look at the fact that we're in a global economic recession and figure out how under this new baseline we approach this a little differently.
Congressman Murphy, a last word for you.
Sure. And, I represent a district in Florida, and for us, the environment affects everything that we do. It's part of our way of life. It affects our economy. And so it's critically important. But what I've been heartened by is that there has been bipartisan efforts, successful bipartisan efforts when it comes to the environment. A really great example is, Matt Gaetz and I are probably pretty far apart on the political spectrum, but he and I have worked together to ensure that there's no drilling in our Gulf. It has both an economic economic and environmental plus, positive effect, but it also enables our military to continue to do their training over the Gulf. So there's a national security element to it too. And as a Florida delegation, almost all of us are unanimous on ensuring that there isn't drilling in the Gulf for those various reasons. I think I think that gives me hope because these issues need bipartisan approaches to be successful and to have staying power, so to speak. There's a bipartisan climate solutions caucus. I'm proud to be a member of that. And those folks, I'm hopeful, will build upon the work that was done from the Select Climate Committee. My colleague from Florida, Representative Castor, has put out a very thorough list of all the different bills that we could actually move forward with. Many of them are bipartisan bills, move forward with in an effort to address our climate change challenges. And then finally, I think with COVID, it showed us that sometimes the biggest threats to this country aren't traditional military threats or terrorism, that they can be public health issues or environmental issues, things other than what you think about as traditional threats to our country, our economy, and our people. And so I think the pathway out of the economic harm that has come as a part of this public health crisis can include very innovative ideas that stimulate the green economy and create jobs in that space as we look to recover from this recession. And I know that on the Ways and Means Committee, we have put forward a number of green tax proposals and tax incentives, things that have bipartisan support and can help us in this recovery and also address our environmental issues. So I'm glad you asked that question, because I think there's a lot of optimism to have there about how we can go about in a bipartisan way to address an issue that is affecting Americans all across this country.
Well, that is a great place to leave this short conversation. Let me just say that, when the decision was made, and this was a thoughtful decision with a big group of people to acknowledge the two of you among all of the House members, it's because you're talented and substantive. It's because you're incredibly hardworking, but it's also because you're fun. You bring humility and humor to your leadership, a little bit of irony, a little bit of friendship. I think that, democracy is a contact sport, and the ability to have the principles of your convictions and at the same time dress up in tiger suits, I think does say a lot about what we need as a nation. And,
says a lot about humility.
A lot about humility. But seriously, you're just terrific folks to work with. Your offices are great to work with. And we look forward to many, many years of collaboration. So thank you both for your service. As I bring tonight's event to a close, I should take a moment just to acknowledge the generous sponsors who helped to make the whole program possible. That includes Vanderbilt University, the American Beverage Association, Frank Islam and Debbie Driesman, Bill and Susan Obendorf, and Arthur Rock and Tony Remby. And just a final thought, the next 4 months are going to be probably some of the most contentious and vulnerable moments for American democracy. I think the election outcome is completely uncertain, but what it is certain is that we are going to have a divided Congress and a divided country. And so the question that animates the Bipartisan Policy Center is, what is it that will enable us to govern a divided country? My hope is that today's discussion gives you all some optimism about the incredibly talented people we have working in our government who are striving every day to make it work for the American people. It is BPC's purpose in life to support these members who have that courage to try to bring their principles forward and at the same time pay attention to and dignify the differences of their colleagues. And we are eager to continue that work, and we very much appreciate your support and your partnership in this endeavor. And so thank you for joining us this evening, and have a lovely night. Take care.